Part 3, Chapter 17 of Short History of the Christian Church by John Fletcher Hurst. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. The Reformation in the Slavic Lands. The Hussite preparation was a powerful aid towards introducing the new measures. John Huss was born about 1369 and burned at Constance in 1415. He became acquainted with Wycliffe's writings when at Prague, as a professor of theology and philosophy in the university, through students who had brought them from England. He eagerly adopted them. In 1402 he was appointed preacher in the Bethlehem chapel, where he preached in the Bohemian language. He afterwards became rector of the university. He attacked all the chief evils in the Church in his day, and in due time the opposition to him became intense. The King of Bohemia took his part. The struggle between the Pope and Huss was long in doubt, the people being with the latter and the priesthood with the former. Pope John XXIII. Summoned a general council which met in Constance in 1414. Huss was ordered thither, and was promised personal safety. But the pledges were violated, and on July 6, 1415, he was publicly burned, and his ashes cast into Lake Constance. But his cause did not die with him. His followers lived as a political and ecclesiastical party in the retired parts of the country. They withdrew to the rugged mountains of Moravia, and lived in quiet. The Moravians, who afterwards went from there and settled in Herrnhut, in Saxony, and, under Zinzendorf, became known as the United Brethren, are the spiritual descendants of John Huss. The Protestantism of Germany had warm sympathizers in every part of Bohemia. Preachers went back and forth between Bohemia and Wittenberg, and Luther was in frequent consultation with them as to the best means of introducing the reform. The Calvinistic theology, together with that of Luther, was likewise introduced. So successful was the work that the greater part of the country became Protestant. The Jesuits, however, made this one of their favorite fields, and, with the emperor on their side, gradually gained the upper hand. In 1627 Protestants were declared heretics, and had to choose between Romanism and death. A universal exile was the result. Bohemian Protestants carried the doctrines of Protestantism into Poland, at this time a powerful and independent kingdom. The crime of the partition and absorption of that country by Prussia, Austria, and Russia was reserved for a later and more enlightened century, being begun in 1768 and completed in 1795. Luther's writings were introduced with great success, but opposed by the king, Sigismund I. His successor, Sigismund Augustus, was favorable to Protestantism, but the movement was weakened by a strife between the Lutheran and Calvinistic confessions, which was closed by the Synod of Sendomir, 1570. The Protestant nobility formed a league, by which a compromise between the Catholics and Protestants was reached in 1573. But there was no general prosperity of the Protestants. They grew in Livonia and other parts of the Baltic coast, but in the interior they led a feeble existence, being ground beneath the schemes of Jesuits and the political revolutions that came from the efforts of Poland to preserve her independence. The work of Protestant disintegration was greatly aided by a colony of Italians, who were so permeated with the skeptical humanism of their country that they were illy prepared for an evangelical Protestantism. Hungary and Transylvania were early fields for the Reformation. Many students went from those far-off regions to Wittenberg, and carried back with them a warm admiration of Luther and an inborn devotion to his cause. Martin Cyriaci was one of the number, and he began to preach in 1524 in favor of the reform. Matthias de Vey, for a time an inmate of Luther's house, came to Hungary full of zeal for the new doctrines, and mightily aided them by voice and pen. He was the first to set up a printing press in Hungary, and the first book issued contained, besides a Hungarian grammar, extracts from Luther's smaller catechism, written in the vernacular. In 1541, Erdősi published, probably from Devei's press, the first New Testament in Hungarian. In 1545, the Synod of Erdöd formally adopted a creed, in 12 articles, in substantial agreement with the Augsburg Confession as the theological standard of the country. Much of the fervor which was shown to Protestantism came from the merchants who had attended the Leipzig fair every year since Luther had begun to preach. When these returned, they not only brought back with them books in favor of the Reformation, but a profound sympathy with the doctrines. Reformers went from Basel, which was in the Protestant ferment, and did much to aid in the good work of propagation. The kings, Louis II., Ferdinand, and John Zapolya, opposed the reform, while Maximilian I favored it. The Peace of Vienna, however, in 1606, resulted in its favor. Both the Lutheran and the Calvinist type of theology were represented. The people who spoke the German language, and heard of the Reformation from preachers who had studied in Wittenberg, adopted the Augsburg Confession, while those who were under the teaching of Swiss preachers adopted the Helvetic Confession. End of chapter 17.